an idea, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act turned the tables of public education. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as IDEA, made it possible for all children with disabilities to attend public schools free of charge and have all the available tools they need to learn and be in the least restrictive environment. The act was a turning point in history because it ensured education for these children who were previously discriminated against and uneducated in inferior state schools, otherwise known as institutions. Before IDEA was passed, children with disabilities were viewed with great prejudice. They were put into state schools that had inhumane living conditions, including being mentally and physically abused, being left to sit in their feces, and not being provided with clothing. IDEA is a law that ensures all qualified children with disabilities cannot be denied a free public education and have to be provided with all the materials they need to learn without any extra expenses. In 1975, President Gerald Ford signed this law, although back then it was called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act.
To be supported by IDEA, the child has to meet one of the 13 categories. These are specific learning disabilities, other health impairment, autism spectrum disorder, emotional disturbance, speech or language impairment, visual impairment, including blindness, deafness, hearing impairment, deaf blindness, orthopedic impairment, intellectual disability, traumatic brain injury, and a child with multiple disabilities.
IDEA is another step to incorporate people with disabilities without discriminating against them, and it lets them develop or improve skills they might not have without getting a proper education.
Not only does IDEA provoke a sense of belonging, but it also sets a legal boundary to guarantee that no businesses or schools manipulate this act.
Several events like the Brown v. Board of Education court case, the separate but equal doctrine, and the recognition of prejudice against people with disabilities brought about IDEA. Before IDEA, there was the Brown v. Board of Education court case, which prohibited children being sent away from schools because of their race.
Without the case, children of color would have been sent to underfunded schools where they could not learn as much as others. It stated the separate but equal doctrine was not to be used anymore, and all children, no matter their race, could go to the same school.
People with disabilities and people of color have experienced many comparable discriminatory actions throughout history and have held similar movements to secure their rights.
Mills v. Board of Education of the District of Columbia was brought to court in 1972.
This ruling stated all children with disabilities could not be denied an education.
Although this helped a few families, not everyone could afford to pay for the education. Teresa Gafford, a former special education teacher, stated, "Some of them were still in institutions and state schools where they didn't really have a chance to learn and grow and develop any social skills." Soon, parents of children with disabilities became upset because while all the other kids that were considered normal got to go to school and grow their education, their children continued to be treated inferior to them.
Fortunately, most U.S. citizens were against the cruel environment of state schools and were overjoyed when IDEA was passed.
McLaughlin said the passing of EHA, which allowed many children with disabilities nationwide to be educated in public schools, helped her see disabilities in a different light and focus on students' abilities and strengths and not only their disabilities, stated Sam Graves, the author of the article, The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and Its Impact. However, some people were against IDEA and were concerned about the effects it would present.
Though he supported the mission to open classroom doors for children with disabilities, the officially conservative president expressed worries that the Education for All Handicapped Children Act would strain the resources of the federal government and raise false expectations of support, stated Michelle R. Davis from Education Week.
Some people thought the institutions were beneficial places for people with disabilities, and many agreed that it was sometimes easier than raising the child themselves.
One of the most renowned institutions was the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island.
This school became most infamous when a reporter from ABC News, Geraldo Rivera, decided to investigate the institution. When Rivera and his crew first arrived, the institution's managers tried to hide the inhumane actions, but Geraldo and his team snuck back into the buildings later on and revealed the truth.
While unannounced, we had found the children naked and basically unattended, he stated, and later went on to say, no rehabilitation, no training, nothing. Inside other institutions, the conditions weren't much better. Laconia State School, although not as bad as Willowbrook, still treated the inhabitants atrociously.
Many of the staff abused the inhabitants and they were left unattended in crowded spaces. Even though these conditions were horrendous, many of the parents didn't know about what was happening inside the state schools because the managers hid it so well. When President Gerald Ford signed IDEA in 1975, it impacted millions of lives and had many immediate impacts on education. The passage of IDEA meant that no more children with disabilities could be turned away from school and required that they have available to them a free, appropriate education, designed to meet their unique needs, Valerie C. Williams declared.
It allows equality and the opportunity for people with disabilities to live independently, self-sufficiently, and to their full potential.
For many, IDEA shined a positive light on people with disabilities and let them see their strengths.
The documentary, Willowbrook, The Last Great Disgrace, stated, if you could get it across to people that retarded people are more normal than they are abnormal, that they have feelings, love, hate, etc., just like normal people. Because of IDEA, people saw others with disabilities and realized the discriminatory actions they had to face.
Although it majorly affected children who were once in institutions, it also impacted students without disabilities. It allowed them to have a more diverse school community and develop better social-emotional skills with peers who may be different than them. IDEA has changed public schools for the better, not only for people with disabilities, but also for people without. Although IDEA helps so many people with disabilities to gain freedom from institutions and get an education, there are also many issues the law presented.
When children with disabilities were integrated with non-disabled children, many parents didn't like the idea that some of the kids would be getting more attention and help from the teachers, and their kids would have less recognition.
Another issue was providing the funding for different tools the children needed to learn and extra funding that even today is not fully provided.
Stephen Steiner, coordinator of special education for the Durango 9R school district, stated,
one of the interesting characteristics of IDEA is that since its passage in 1975, it has not been fully funded by the federal government. As a result, we have legislation passed, but we do not necessarily have the funding to make all of these laws a reality.
Although IDEA impacted many things immediately, it also was a significant turning point for years after it got into effect.
Since IDEA was passed, children are no longer being put into institutions. These institutions closed down so that the people within them could have the education they deserve.
Along with institutions closing, many laws were inspired by IDEA. One of the major ones was the Americans with Disabilities Act. Passed in 1990, the Act states, the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in several areas, including employment, transportation, and many more. George H.W. Bush stated, it will ensure that people with disabilities are given the basic guarantees for which they have worked so long and so hard, independence, freedom of choice, control of their lives, and the opportunity to blend fully and equally into the rich mosaic of the American mainstream.
Not only did IDEA inspire other laws, but it was also changed to accommodate more people and help them transition from school to adult life.
The article, A History of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, stated, the 1990 reauthorization changed the law's name from EHA to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It also added traumatic brain injury and autism as new disability categories.
IDEA's legacy still lives today in many books and documentaries, like Certain Proof, A Question of Worth, IDEA 2004, Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act, and many more.
The U.S. has progressed from excluding nearly 1.8 million children with disabilities from public schools prior to EHA implementation to providing more than 7.5 million children with disabilities as special education designed to meet their individual needs. Abusive state schools continued to close throughout the end of the 1900s, thus concluding the reign of these institutions. We need to remind everyone that institutions must never be a way of life for anyone ever again, said a speaker at the closing of Laconia State School.
Without the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the residents of institutions would have lives full of neglect, abuse, and illiteracy.
I would say that there would be a lost generation of people, not just one generation, but several generations, without IDEA, stated Teresa Gafford.
Since the enactment of IDEA, children with disabilities have been granted the right to public education and freedom to learn alongside others without disabilities.
Once this law was passed, people with disabilities were able to take advantage of their rights and grow as individuals because they could have the proper education they deserved.
Many laws came after IDEA to enhance its purpose and show the world the amazing people who were previously in the dark.
The people who fought for this law to be passed showed bravery and perseverance when they went against what most of the population had accepted and changed public education for good.
IDEA has been a positive influence in today's society and will continue to be throughout the future of education.
The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was a turning point in history because it helped create the transition from institutions to public schools.
It lets people with disabilities feel included and have equal access to services. It is another step in erasing discrimination.